First of all, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing frogs.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got that.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Tomorrow, Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
Guyanese
erratic
Mikhail
detective,
Rodriguez.
is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? No, Gildarie, you deal with that. You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Gildarie, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. You're watching the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. Last Friday, we would have completed 15 months of this program. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to you, wherever you are. Thanks for patronizing us for the past 15 months. As they say in commerce or in management or business, it would never be the same if we didn't have patrons or customers. So we have to thank you. We also have to thank for the past 15 months those inquiring, interesting, and patriotic Guyanese who graced our studio and in doing so contributed to the historiography of Guyana. Leonard Gildarie, the prodigal son, has returned. He's in the studio this evening with me. Programs like these will always feature at this critical juncture of Guyana's future. Programs like these, and in any forum, whether it's television, whether it's other social media platform, whether the newspapers, the thrust of Guyana's development, the future of Guyana seems to revolve now at this critical juncture around our economic direction, oil, and the flourishing of business. I have heard so many times there. We had a guest here who's a long-standing member of parliament, and I knew him before he was a member of parliament, Dharam Kumar Siraj, and he told me he cannot get his plumber that worked with him for a long time because the guy is simply busy. So on programs like these, we will constantly feature experts who will tell us about the future of Guyana. In the studio this evening, we have someone who wears 3 hats. He's an academic. He once taught economics at the University of Guyana. He is a trained economist. He's also a businessman, and he's the senior vice president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Our guest this evening is Richard Rambaran. Mr. Rambaran, thanks for being here on the program.
Thank you for having me, Freddie. Thank you, Leonard.
Now, we've had your colleagues in the private sector, in the GMA. We've had a few weeks ago the head of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce. And the question always, to all of them, even when we've had businessmen who are not business executive in these umbrella organizations, the question is always about oil. I once saw you on Kaicho radio discussing oil, and I like what you were saying. It was quite contrary to the people who think that oil is not important. We could just take Exxon by the scruff of its neck and say, hey, we want this contract to be renewed. Tell us about this thing about contract renewal. We've had many people here in your area who say you just cannot go to a company and tell them we want to we want to negotiate a renewal of the contract. As an economist, what's your take on that?
Right. So firstly, gentlemen, thank you for inviting me on the program. Congratulations on your 15 months. And I continue to look forward and anticipate good programs like the one that you have done, the ones you've done in the past. So Freddie, thank you for your question. It's a very poignant question and important for us to start with, because at this juncture, oil and gas remains one of the most critical sectors in the Guyanese economy. Now, with that alone, and with the drive that is happening, Guyana is catapulted not only on a regional forefront or on a regional stage, but on a global stage now. And it's no small secret. When one visits many of the other countries and when we do outbound trade missions from the Chamber of Commerce, you understand why, in a thorough sense, the oil and gas sector is important. And so from the very outset, one has to understand and recognize the importance of the oil and gas sector. Specifically to answer your question, we have always said it from a private sector perspective, and it has now become almost an ongoing mantra, but it cannot be understated. The sanctity of contracts is extraordinarily important. Why? Because good faith, trust, ensuring strong institutions, and a protection of legal instruments constitute the underpinnings of a democracy, constitute the underpinnings of a free society, and constitute the underpinnings of a market-based economy. If we are to begin to renege on those key principles and those statutes and those real steadfast positions, then I believe we'll begin slip into anarchy. Now, it may seem as an extreme proposition, but when one examines it, if you begin at a very macro level to renege on contracts, to begin to move in the direction of violation of the sanctity of contracts, envision what it is that will happen at even at the tier below, and then in the micro level at the interactions. So it's extraordinarily important that we don't run away with this idea that somehow we can just jump up as a country, and because we don't like what was done by a particular political group or by a particular government, that, you know, now it is all subject to change. That is not how international business works.
Leonard?
Yeah, thank
Leonard
you very
Gildarie,
much.
the prodigal son, has returned.
You're stuck on that word prodigal, eh? It sounds something word
But that's what
in
happened.
biblical
It's a
proportions.
common journalistic term, anyway.
Okay. Well, it's always good to have our bright minds in the end. This program is not that very sexy if you're looking for the kind of bacchanal that you're going to see on the other shows. We here about serious talks about the development of this country, and you have to get the minds gathered in the room, sitting at the table to discuss those things. I saw over the weekend, I saw a news article today with the president meeting the teachers and heads of department and deputy headmistresses and so on. And one of the things that struck me is that he said to them, look, as part of the benefits that we want to give to you guys as teachers is lowering interest rates to 3.75. And that struck me as quite remarkable. I tell you, there was one time in Guyana a few years back, about a decade or so, until I think Finale was the Minister of Housing. And they came up and they struck a deal with, I think it was NBS at that time, to lower the interest rate to about 6.something%. I think that was about a decade back. Yeah. I remember that because that was so remarkable. I benefited from it. Now you're talking about 3.75. This is remarkable because when you do the comparison to what prevails in the States, in the United States right now, interest rates are about 8%. And you got to hear how people bawl, and every time there's a point something of a percent, the people raise hell, the realtors, the homeowners, and everybody, because everything is refinancing and credits and everything across. If you go to the bank, if you don't have credit, you're dead. And so I want to ask you, when you're talking about interest rates in our country and this latest something, because it's not cash that you give into people, it's a benefit that has a tremendous impact maybe for the next 30 years, that is going to have an impact on you because you're locking in the rate. I want to ask you, how is the feeling with regards to the future of Guyana and people actually taking advantage of some of the opportunities that are happening, because the opportunities are real. These are real figures we talk about here.
Precisely. So I think, Leonard, that's an excellent observation. And one of the things to note about the Guyanese real estate sector is that we have prices and the way that financial instruments that are provided to the consumers, the way that it's structured, is actually very consumer friendly. If one is to go to take a real estate mortgage in the United Kingdom, say, for example, or one of the other developed economies, or any rapidly emerging economy, if you examine the structure of the instrument that you'll receive, you'll find that there is what you call a variable or a floating interest rate. So you would take the product, maybe let's say it's a 20-year mortgage, and you'll lock in an interest rate for maybe, say, 2 years. But then at the end of 2 years, it is revalued and it is changed based on the prevailing market conditions. And that has actually put a lot of pressure on the UK consumer. When one observes the Guyanese economy and what happens here, not only do we have institutions such as NBS that cater for lower income to middle income persons, and not only is the government's, so that's one dimension. Secondly, not only is the government's policy moving stronger in that direction, but you find that the low income bracket ceiling, the threshold that they're implementing, budget to budget, every fiscal year, it's actually increasing. Now I believe they cater up to $20 million at a reduced interest rate, which, when you think about it, $100,000 in a developing economy, and in an economy like Guyana, can get you a fairly substantial piece of property. Now, what that does over the medium to long term is that it creates wealth, and it creates wealth in a meaningful way. Because, of course, you gentlemen would know that once you are able to obtain your asset, you, one, lock in intergenerational wealth, so your children can then obtain the property, and then they can use the property further as equity contribution into something else to be able to get another loan. And so what it does, it creates a multiplier effect, and it really creates an intergenerational effect so that wealth in the country can be generated. Now you juxtapose that alongside a policy that maybe, let's say, it's cash grants or cash handouts. What does that materially do to create wealth? It doesn't create wealth. What it does, it helps with income. And so I think when we look at that distinction between income and wealth, I think that it's an excellent move in that direction for wealth creation for Guyanese. So I always believe that we need to move in that direction of wealth creation. And for me, that represents a material step, particularly for a working class grouping like the teachers.
And I think that's interesting before you come in there, Freddie. When you look, one could very well argue that you could look overseas and the people are earning much more, but the basket of goods or the basket of benefits that the government is, or incentives, whatever you want to call it, that the government is going to unroll would have to be a variety of things. And this is the direction I want you to get. I myself, and I've seen people sitting right at the table here, say that, I have a little reservation about too much cash grants and so on. But it was part, and we got to look into the whole context of coming out of COVID, that COVID-19 period, and people were really struggling, and that you had to put something into the pocket. And I think that would have been good. But going forward, it has to be a number of things that comes. And if you have cheaper mortgage benefits, if you have a little cash something, if you have a salary increase, all these are part of the basket of goods. But I just wanted to make that observation. Freddie?
I want to take you back to your radio program when you were discussing oil. I find it for an educated man who is growing older and who studied international relations, studied politics, I find it, I don't know what to describe, but a group of people who are not schooled in the petroleum industry, in international relations, can just form themselves into a group and say, Guyana get a bad deal. We must demand more. What is Guyana government supposed to do in the face of a multi-trillion-dollar industry? And the powerful EU governments are watching. The United States, our neighbor, and Canada, the UK are watching. CARICOM heads are watching. That this small, poor country that has been in the doldrums for 70 years, they are demanding that Exxon come to the table, and they're harassing Exxon to come to the table. What would the world say to us if we go to these people and say, okay, listen, we get a raw deal? No, we want you to come back to the table. If Exxon say, no, we are a multi-trillion-dollar company that operate all over the world, you can't talk to us like that. What happens?
Well, Freddie, I think we don't have to look very far to understand what it is that can happen. If you recall, that is precisely the road that Venezuela started to go down back in the 2000s, in the last decade under Chavez, and that is exactly where it started. You see, one has to, I go back to it once again, one has to understand the fundamentals and the underpinnings of a market society. The right to private property, the sanctity of contracts, ensuring that property is not usurped, things are not expropriated. Those are key elements. And so we can't just hang up on the fact that, oh, it is a quote-unquote bad contract and have, things being advanced into the public domain. Now, I want to just break that down, advanced into the public domain irresponsibly. I want to just break it down a little bit further. If one thinks about a contractual arrangement, if you have to go and rent a house, Freddie, you will not take it upon yourself to say, oh, I'm going to go draft the contract. You'll consult with an attorney. If you have to do an employment contract for someone who's working with you, you'll not take it upon yourself to just draft the contract. You'll consult with an attorney. And so, if one examines as an activity becomes more complex and more layered, and you appreciate the context of a complex activity, you'll understand that there are several layers in a contractual arrangement as the activity becomes more complex. Now, what I identified to you there is a simple contract between two private individuals. Can you, for a very simple commodity, can you imagine a multi-year agreement that is between a sovereign and a multinational company, in the nature and size of ExxonMobil? The extent of the contract, the complexity of the contract, the nature and structure of the legal arrangements, which jurisdiction it falls under, where it goes to. Now, for me, Freddie, I believe that it is utterly anti-intellectual for someone to attempt to simplify or try to break that down to such a level just for cheap points. And the reason I say that is I believe that once one has a platform, you have to be able to use it responsibly to inform people in a responsible manner. Now, screaming at the top of your lungs every single day, for example, is not a way to go about doing that. There are other methods in doing so. How many seminars do we see to really intellectually delve into the contract? I understand that it is important for the general public to grasp it, but how many sessions do we see breaking that down? How many experts have been invited into Guyana who have done this all around the world, because we're not unique with a production sharing agreement as a country. It's been done in dozens of other countries. How many of those people have actually come to Guyana, sit at a round table, and we've had the discussions? Now, I'm saying all of this essentially to say, I do not believe that you can approach it in that way if a meaningful conversation is to be had. I believe that it ought to be done in a more structured manner. I believe it ought to be done in a more intellectually rigorous fashion and by individuals who understand and who are qualified to speak on the topic. Because this is not some sort of simpleton arrangement where, it is just an everyday transaction. This is something it is multi-layered, and there are several nuances and varying degrees of complexities in the articles, in the structure, in the jurisdiction, in the way that it is crafted, etc. And so I'd offer that it is anti-intellectual and it is a very simpleton approach to understanding it.
Well, let me ask you a question along the way, and what is... I've seen the arguments being used. I think Rowley was in Guyana, Prime Minister of Trinidad, and Rowley says, and this is more coming from an emotional perspective, it doesn't reflect the reality of the situation. He says, if there is an agreement and one party is happy, is that really an agreement? And I think that was so simplistic in itself. But do you know of any case, my direct question, because you have some legal side to you too, do you know of any case or cases around the world where you have such an agreement as a frontier country, because we are a frontier country, in which an agreement could just be broken or renegotiated just a very early stage? Because Guyana's context, even David Graham just said that as president, is quite unique in that you have thrown into the works is that you have the Venezuela security issue with our borders there, and they had used the argument that we were forced to, make sure that we signed this thing, among other reasons, because of the fact that Venezuela was coming in, and Exxon's presence here gave us that added incentive of protecting our borders. But do you know of any cases around the world in which very early, at such an early frontier stage, that a country was able to break or renegotiate a contract with a big multinational company or with an oil company?
Not immediately. No one comes to mind, and I can understand why no case would exist of that nature, because it puts your country in tremendous jeopardy. You're talking here about not only something that is a simple commodity. Oil is a commodity that has geopolitical implications. It has implications for energy security. It has implications on your country's coffers, the revenues. It is a commodity that has multiple industries that can arise from it. And so the net economic benefit that one is to have from simply having oil production in the country, the net economic benefit, and the multiply effect, the number of forward and backward linkages that are created by way of the presence of the production of oil, that in itself provides a wide economic benefit. And so I don't know of any country who they have oil and gas, and then few years, 2 years, 3 years into production, they say, oh, guess what? Let's change things now. That is it would boggle the mind for someone to do that. I mean, you think about some very simple cases that, if let's say you want to paint this room, someone comes into the room and they see the room, and you agree on a price, you agree on a contract, and then halfway through, You sign up your contract, everything, and then halfway through, the painter just suddenly decides, well, guess what? There's somebody else that or your neighbor or something, you're going to have to pay me more. What would you do in that case?
Freddie, I'm going to refer to saying here is so very important. I remembered, and correct me if I'm wrong, you recall that case with the WARF and BK? Why I'm raising that issue, because if I could remember reading, they had gone after BK because they said something was wrong with the paperwork and the payments, and he didn't honor his obligations. But somewhere along the line, during that court case, BK company argued that, look, while we did not, or his lawyers argue, while we did not do what you were supposed to do, we did other things with that WARF. But I wanted to put that on the table because it's a show that is not any legal cases that you have. It's just not just straightforward. And in this particular case, you ain't going to go buck a big company like Exxon, which has all the big lawyers. And in any case, I think it was the Vice President, Barjagde, who had said, look, we have many ways in which we could bell the cat here. We could come back to the table, and we have to give permits, and we could say to them, we could have negotiation going on right there. We could get a little, I think the term that he used was clawbacks. Mm-hmm. We could get clawbacks, but it is interesting to note, and what I've noted that you've said here, what Freddie would have also noted. It is, you just can't just break a contract, the sanctity of contract just like that. But I would fully agree if somebody to argue that as government and as a key partner in an agreement where Exxon is the operator, that there are ways that you could probably use your muscles as a government to say, look, let's get a little something more, let's squeeze a little more out of this.
So I just wanted to interject. Sorry, Freddie. I just wanted to interject to make
the main man
two or three key points in tandem with what you were saying. Firstly, one contract alone is not the sole thing in Guyana. We see a new model PSA coming out. The general public has been given the opportunity to comment on it, give their feedback, etc. So that's one component of it. Secondly, contractual arrangements only cover the revenue that will accrue to the state. All right? One very important component of the entire architecture of oil and gas and its integration into the economy is that of local content. Mm-hmm. And I want us to go there specifically because the implementation of local content also provides in tandem or parallel to revenues accruing to the state, revenues accruing to the private sector. Mm-hmm. And not just revenue accruing to a specific group in the private sector, but wide-ranging benefits that will accrue to the private sector. Because why? You have your operator, tier one contractors, multiples, and then they procure from a wide range of folks. Now that is the oil and gas sector. But then there is also the non-oil and gas sector, the subsectors that grow concomitant with the petroleum industry. And you're looking at tourism, agriculture and agro-processing, professional services, legal services, and the list goes on with the number of subsectors. And so it was extraordinarily important that if we did not, or if as a country, the contract that we had was not the best, it was extraordinarily important that we had two main things. One, a structuring of a model contract that we can use in the future, which we have achieved. Secondly, the implementation of local content in a meaningful fashion where benefits can accrue to the non-state actors in the entire country. And those for me are two very critical points. I think it is also to the government's benefit and to the state's benefit and to the government's praise that they have been able to implement the Natural Resources Fund, which of course benefits future generations. It helps with macroeconomic stability, etc. And so I wanted to just put that out there, that those two areas were very important for us to get right. And I think even if we have not been able to get it 100% perfect, at least we are much closer to it being perfect than we are in the absence of it. So I just wanted to advance.
Thank you very much.
The head of your organization was here a few weeks ago. Every business executive that has been here, every person connected with finance that has been here, including the head of GoInvest. Now just let me quote what the head of GoInvest said on that very chair you were sitting on. He was praising the direction of the economy is going into. He was very, very optimistic about Guyana's future. And then he said in passing, we're getting there. The only thing left to fix is the banking thing. That's the head of GoInvest. I saw the vice president enraged about the banking system. I know you were part of a meeting with the head of the your body, the Guyana Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Hudson say he can't disclose what occurred, what happened at the meeting. It's a meeting with GCCI and the Minister of Finance, etc. But he said we will see changes coming. Those changes, when they come, I think every Guyanese is going to jump so high for joy that they're going to get stuck coming down back.
Yeah. So access to finance and the ease of access to finance has been a hurdle for many private sector
You don't want to
folks.
say nightmare?
It's been a nightmare in a general sense, yes, but it has been a hurdle really in terms of accelerating business. I don't want to say a nightmare because then we're going to create the construct as though access to finance, has totally dampened everything. And I don't think that is so. Guyanese businesses are very resilient and they have found innovative ways to have equity partners, even in the absence of a capital markets that is very active, etc. But I agree with Peter Ramsrup, the CEO for GoInvest. The direction in which we're headed is one that is very, very promising.
The only thing left to fix is the banking thing, is what he said.
So the real sector has exploded, the productive sector. And if you look at our financial sector, recall, Freddie, that what we see in our financial architecture, both in terms of legislatively as well as institutionally, it emerged out of our structural adjustment program in the late 1980s.
Under Mr.
Hoyt. And a lot of what we see was really geared towards macroeconomic stability and avoiding systemic risk, which is essentially what put us into the position we were in the 1980s, and we had the entire last decade of growth. So that's essentially what our structural adjustment program catered for. Now, if you look at the subsequent developments in the Guyanese economy, maybe let's say from the time that we had the several rounds of Paris Club negotiation, MDRI relief, etc. in the mid-2000s, let's look at our development henceforth. I would reckon to say that the laws and the institutions in the financial sector did an extraordinarily good job at what it was supposed to do. We kept our economy stable. We had stable foreign exchange. We built a very good reserve of forex. We were able to keep inflation low. We were able to avoid the global financial crisis in 2008, or at least the impact of it was not as much or as acute in Guyana as in many other countries integrated into the global financial architecture. And so I would say that if you examine, for example, the 10 years 2009 to 2019, our inflation rate was between 1 to 1.5%, amongst the lowest in the Latin American and Caribbean region. Our foreign exchange rate, almost anyone who lived through that era in any sort of cognitive state of understanding would be able to tell you offhand, 205 Guyana dollars to $1 US, 210. It did not jump all around. We didn't have inflation in double digits. We didn't have foreign exchange all over the place. There wasn't a shortage of that. We were always above the benchmark that the IMF sets of 3 months. And so I think that the financial sector, both the legal as well as the institutional framework, did its job for the creation of a sound economy, an economy that was very stable or is very stable, and it created the conditions under which growth could have occurred in a meaningful way. Particularly when looked at against the backdrop of where we came from, especially in the late 1970s and up to the mid 1980s. When one looks at what has happened, however, since the production or the commencement of production of oil and gas, maybe let's say pre-production, all of the activities that had to go on there, it is an explosion. I was speaking with some colleagues today from in the region, and they were saying, Richard, what growth looks like for countries in the region that are emerging, not rapidly, but they're emerging economies. Growth for them looks like if someone has a factory, they maybe want to build one more with the thought of one more in the future. So doubling what they're currently doing. If one has a wharf, you maybe want to expand the wharf next door. But when one looks at what is happening in the real sector here, the productive sector, people aren't thinking in that kind of term. And so with an exponential growth in the real sector, it can't be a financial sector that only caters for avoidance of systemic risk and ensuring macroeconomic stability. That is important, yes, but it is extraordinarily important too that we are able to channel what is called idle capital. How do we do that? We do that through the development of the capital markets. Jamaica, for example, has done a fantastic job in the creation of good capital markets and driving along. If an individual, and this is an extraordinarily important point because it speaks to how an individual can meaningfully participate in the rapidly emerging economy. Why is it that someone who has maybe saved $25,000 or let's say $5,000, why can't they have an avenue through which they are able to invest that? In Guyana, we don't have that. But if you look at a functioning capital markets and a materially advanced capital market, you'll find that feature is prominent. You're able to invest, for example, maybe let's take Jamaica. You're able to invest in the junior stock exchange, where you have companies that have now gone to the public. You are able to actively participate through a variety of instruments that are on offer. And so we can't take that the financial sector must just remain in this one way to support the growth that was going along incrementally. We have had a tremendous explosion in the real sector, and I think once we are able to have that similarly mirrored transformation in the financial sector, that you will see a real unlocking of Guyana's growth potential. I think that is what Peter Ramsarup, I think, was alluding to. That is an extraordinarily important point because it's for me the key to unlocking Guyana's growth.
Well, he made specific reference to the banking system, and I think Timothy Tucker, your colleague, was very, very acidic about the unbearable rigidities of the bank. Now, a few weeks ago, somebody you would know very well because of his prominence in the financial/banking system said this to me. And when he said that thing to me, like my skin grew. He said the Anti-Money Laundering Act, as implemented by the banks, affect more people who are quite ordinary, billions of miles away from anything about money laundering, than the actual people who have money in that you should look at in terms of, because of the largeness of the finance. And that was such a sad and tragic statement. I mean, Gildarie has faced it. I have faced it. For example, I don't know what you discussed with the chamber, discussed with the finance minister, but here what I'm contending, and if I ever meet the vice president, I would ask him just one favor. How is it that when your bank account goes dormant after a year, why you can't go and say, could be reactivated? Why you have to get your grandfather transport? Why you have to get your marriage certificate?
Grandmother
Why you
Icon.
have to get your thing goes dormant? You go into the bank, show them your ID card, and your thing is renewed. That perversity, that degeneracy, that vulgarity in banking has to stop, because money laundering, commonsensically, is the movement of money for illegal purposes. So my little $5 million, they call and say it's dormant. Why you have to? Where is the movement of money that would make you suspicious?
So
the thing goes dormant.
Freddie, think about this.
No,
right?
no, you guys have to do something about that. You really have to confront these banking people.
But think about this, right? And this is one thing that has always boggled my mind since the implementation of it, and the stricter application of the AML regulations by the commercial banks. Because recall the history, we already were on the blacklist. We had to implement the strictest form of the legislation and ensure full adherence to all components of it. Then when the regulations, Supervisory Guideline 13 from the Bank of Guyana, those were released to the commercial banks, they then put the ultra strictest application on it because of where we were. Notwithstanding, that has evolved it has not evolved and things have not changed. I think you might appreciate this framework to think about it. And of course, you're a social scientist. And what I think has happened is that we have essentially had the law of an unintended consequence with this AML thing.
Yeah. And collateral damage. And so many other
think about it within this construct. If it is so difficult because of AML regulations and KYC requirements, know your customer requirements, to open a bank account, then what eventually happens? You just force more people to not be in the banking system. And you have Guyanese who will continue to just be cash-based, and they'll say, oh, well, I can't open a bank account. You think about the average person, Freddie, who will take time off from maybe, say, their job. Maybe they're not in a job that will pay them through the bank, but they're taking time off from their job. They get a 2 hours time off. Firstly, to stand in the line alone is 2 hours, right? But think about when you reach up there, you'll take 2, 3, sometimes 4 days to simply to get the documents together to open the account. When you reach there, it's a whole other thing. You think about the average person, they'll just say, you know something? Forget about this. I ain't going to open no bank account. And so the law of unintended consequences has actually prevailed here, where the strict application of the AML regulations has actually forced more people or a number of people to stay outside of the banking system as opposed to being incorporated or captured in the financial system where they can be actively monitored.
You understand how much of a serious statement that Mr. Rambaran has just made there? And what you've said
it's
there,
against the purpose
Freddie,
of
right. And I
what is the point? I know the vice president's no nonsense man.
But let me tell you, I was down in New York just about
Mr. Jack, are you listening? Right? Are you looking?
In New York, and let me tell you this is something that we got to think about in terms of customer service, because I don't think the bank are getting it. They got to be doing something. If the managers are not on the floor, they're not going to see the poor, I don't want to use the words here, the poor customer service is happening. It's unbelievable. I went into a bank in New York and we did 4 transactions, including sending somebody out to an Asian country. I'm saying this because I was out today in 40 minutes. One person did it. They give me a card, they give that, they did that, and 4 transactions in 40 minutes.
Something has to...
No, it is unbelievable. We're not paying attention to customer service in this country.
Yeah.
aside from that, so you could answer, but I have a question to ask you.
You would have been coming out after 8 hours if it was Guyana.
No, you would have been 5 days.
No, you would
back
have to.
and forth.
No, you would have to sleep in your car.
No, Freddie Kissoon, you go into the bank and you would have a customer clerk tell you you're missing this document. The people who are out there who are watching are going to tell you about this story. I'm in the bank ever so often, and I could tell you the nightmare, unbelievable. And what you've said there, I fully agree, and I don't think you understand how much people that is affecting. But I got a couple of questions I want to ask you, one after the other. Sure. One, the opposition or a delegation of opposition members went to Washington. You are part of one of the leading advocacy body, business advocacy body in this country. Are you concerned that this delegation, which is of top officials of the opposition, according to 2020 elections, 217,000 persons voted for them, to the support for them? Are you worried as GCCI that maybe what they would have said and told officials of the United States that it could have been true or it could not have been true? Are you preparing or contemplating any thoughts of meeting with the opposition to find out what exactly? Because I don't think I've seen a statement coming from the opposition as to what exactly did you do? Did you present any evidence of this widespread corruption, of the discrimination, of everything?
Right. So let me take it and let me answer it with, of course, strictly GCCI lens. The GCCI firstly meets with the opposition. We have always done that as a Chamber of Commerce. When the current political party was in opposition, we met with them as the opposition. We have met with Mr. Harman, we have met with Mr. Norton, both of them being opposition leaders. And so that interaction can be anticipated to continue. We'll continue to meet with the opposition as a statutory body in the country. As you know, GCCI is a bit different from the other umbrella organizations. We're established by a law. And so that makes us a statutory agency.
The others aren't?
The others aren't established by law. The GCCI is the only umbrella organization that is established by a law. We're established by Chapter 8903 of the Laws of Guyana, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry Act, which sets out how we must operate, etc. The others are either established under the Friendly Societies Act or they're established as non-for-profit companies under the Companies Act. So the GCCI is unique in that sense.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's it's a part of what we must do statutorily as an organization. We have to meet with all stakeholders in the country. So we'll continue as a
That's an old law, though. That's a law during colonial times, I guess.
Yes, but it was also updated in the 1970s as well as in the 1980s.
Okay. Updated on the board.
Continue. I want to hear.
So yeah, now going to specifically what you asked first, whether we are worried. The GCCI was an observer at the 2020 election. Let me just state that firstly. And so what positions we have as a Chamber of Commerce is not by way of hearsay. It is not by way of secondary information. We were primary to the process, and we fielded an observer mission, to which I was one of the heads of the observer mission for the GCCI. So we speak with first-hand information. We, of course, put out our several statements. We put out what we observed. And subsequently, there have been a number of reports that have been published in addition to ours, including the EU report, including the Carter Center, including the CARICOM, and many other very reputable and prominent international and regional agencies. And so I would not imagine any condition under which US government officials are not thoroughly and comprehensively informed about what is contained in those reports, what actually transpired in Guyana, and what the current occurrences are. If you and I living here know, and there is a diplomatic presence here in Guyana, I can almost guarantee that that diplomatic presence will know. And so I would not be worried everyone is entitled to their own opinion, everyone is entitled to their form of analysis, but what matters is whether the derivation of your analytical position bears merit, or if it follows a logical process, or if it is able to come to a firm final reasoning. And people are not silly. They know how to compare, they know how to analyze, and they know when things are awry or when things go in a particular line. And so the Chamber of Commerce as an organization would not be worried. And I can tell you, as a Chamber of Commerce, certainly we will continue to meet with not just opposition but also with government, because it's a part of our function.
I'm glad Leonard steered us away from some of the technical things that have been occupying us the past 40 minutes. I want to continue with the trend with Leonard. The Chamber of Commerce operates by statute.
Mm-hmm.
What I know, previous heads of the different business body, we have asked them about corporate generosity.
Mm-hmm.
What are you guys doing for the lesser endowed folks in this country?
What do you mean endowed?
Well, people,
okay, sorry.
like the hospitals, the public donations to the public hospitals, to the Dharamsala. They have people.
So
they have a big Muslim orphanage, so they need stuff.
We're not doing as much as Leonard, because you saw his reaction just now, right?
Well,
No, I wanted to know.
His reactions are incomprehensible. So go ahead, sir. Let's go ahead.
So, firstly, let me just say that at the Chamber of Commerce, we have set up what is called a relief fund. And so all of our members contribute to our relief fund. Now, what this does, it means that if a cause arises, we are not then scrambling to organize our members to say, oh, look, contribute. So we have a relief fund that we have established in the GCCI, where contributions are consistently made by our members, which is a pretty sizable membership, almost 900 companies now.
I hope they're paying their dues.
Yes, so they do pay their dues.
He is supposed to be joining.
He's a member.
I'm a fully paid up member.
He's a fully paid member.
Watch your membership dues.
Yeah, I watch it closely.
Yeah, I'm fully paid up, man.
I watch it closely, because I know he ain't got no excuse.
No, he can't be on 3 nights a week on one of the most popular interview programs and not living up to his moral obligations.
No, I lead by example. What's wrong with you?
He's one of the first names I look for.
Yeah.
So
for obvious reason, he's in the public limelight and preaching to change Guyana. So you got to look.
There's a guest here. I'm not a guest, you know.
Keep looking for his name, man.
So we do have the fund established, and what we do is that we support a number of causes, particularly when there are causes that are of national nature. So, for example, the Madhya fire, we would have ensured that we had boots on the ground, funding activities, etc. Once there is a flood somewhere, we would pull together hampers. We would dispatch. We would work with the CDC. This is something that we've been doing for years. When there were several hurricanes in the region, for example, we pulled together massive donations, hundreds of thousands of US dollars from our members. And so it is an ongoing process. So that's one. I just wanted to identify that we do have a structured way and a mechanism that we consistently engage the society. That's one component. Secondly, the GCCI ensures that as an organization that we operate in a responsible manner, in the sense that we have one thing called the Vision Fund Grant, where aspiring entrepreneurs annually at our Business Development Forum, they can write proposals, and the winners of that competition would then be selected by the chamber, mentored, launched into full-fledged businesses, and ensure that they move into the field of business. That's second component. Thirdly, we have something now called the Teen Internship program, where we're taking young people from schools, having them being enrolled in the programs, and they are being exposed to business on a daily basis, side by side with CEOs, CFOs, etc., so that we can build a cadre of professionals in the country that are private sector minded. And so our corporate responsibility, corporate generosity is not only limited to sponsorship, it's not only limited to giving money to folks, but we operate in a structured manner where we have a fund that can contribute to several causes, and we have several capacity development programs and training programs that are free of charge and helping to mentor young people in Guyana. So it's not a unidimensional type of corporate support. That's a full thing. And then I just want to identify another. Fourthly, we have a code of conduct that as a chamber we operate by, and all members of the chamber have to sign to that code of conduct. Part of that code of conduct includes corporate generosity or corporate social responsibility. And that's why, of course, Leonard here can tell you.
So the 900 constituent have to sign.
Yes, and it's actually it's actually listed on the OAS's website as a model code of conduct for chambers of commerce. You can just Google Chamber of Commerce Guyana OAS, and you'll see it come up there.
It's very good that that we could have the kind of mind that we have with Mr. Rambaran and by extension so many others within our country. People have been saying all kinds of things about Guyanese, but we've been a resilient bunch of people. There's a unique situation.
Chicken curry or curry chicken?
I love my country. I love my chicken, man.
Chicken. We like chicken curry or curry chicken?
Chicken curry is always.
Which one Guyanese is saying? Chicken curry or curry chicken?
Let me don't go there. You want to go there? Okay, hold on. We have a unique situation happening now, GPL. And I want to talk about that very quickly because we run out of time. GPL is finding itself in a very difficult position right now. The demand for electricity has moved from 150 megawatts to 180. A couple of engines are down. They're trying to get in some engines here as early as possible. In the meantime, throw in a little spanner into the works there as well is the heat. This thing is unbelievable, unbearable. Freddie Kissoon says he's not being affected because he lives next to the seawall. But I want to ask you, how have you been, the president has made a statement with regards those big companies who have gone back to GPL because of the cheaper rates. It's cheaper to go on to GPL. He's saying to them, could you go back and start self-generating between the key period? How have you been briefed as to how long that we could expect the situation? Because right now we have a load shedding taking place.
Yes.
Are you concerned because business is going to be affected? People are being affected, and it's extremely hot.
Yeah. So thank you for that. It's a very pertinent question and very topical at the moment. So firstly, we have not been thoroughly briefed. What is in the public domain is also what we know as a business support organization. So that's the first thing. Secondly, it is on our agenda, which we have already begun work on it. It is on our agenda to have a meeting with GPL to understand not the issues, but how the policy that has been adumbrated by the president and the vice president will be implemented. Because we've heard them say that they will tax heavy consumers off the grid. So we will meet with GPL. We've already moved in that direction. If we had this meeting, if we had this program maybe 2 weeks from now, if we were having it 2 weeks from now, I perhaps would have had more substantial information to relate to you. But that is on the cards in terms of what we will do. It is a position at the moment of the Chamber of Commerce that electricity continues to be one of the major impediments to key operations. Some enterprises, yes, have moved back to the grid because of the cost. but we also do have many of our major manufacturers and many of our major producers who, because of the instance in the first place, were not on the grid. And so what we need to understand from GPL is who exactly are they going to categorize as being heavy users, and for how long will the taxation period be? And then we need to understand how many of our members will be affected. We need to understand who those members are, because I mean, if you have one or two persons who will be able to sort themselves out, and but otherwise we'll have to examine it in a meaningful way.
But it's just an ongoing conversation that we have to have, because at the end of the day, I think just before Freddie, I know you want to close, but I think what is significant out of this whole conversation is that never before in our history that you have demands rising at such a significant way, and the numbers are there. They're giving you the numbers, and that tells you how this country is growing.
Just think about it, Freddie, before you go, because I know you want to close.
Yeah.
But just before you go, I made a statement earlier that the real sector has exploded, and the financial sector has to follow suit, because it's a supporting sector. The real sector has exploded, and the energy sector also has to follow suit, because it's a transformation. It's no longer can be an incremental thing. And I think that's where the gas to energy project comes in. But of course, that brings it a whole other discussion, which we won't have time for on this program.
I want to, as someone who grew up on the seawall, my father was a groundsman at St. Stanislaus College. I left primary school. I used to go and keep his company. So I grew up and I know that seawall. You should go and see what the First Lady has done. It's fantastic. Gone back to the 50s and 60s, where families could go and sit down.
It's a beautiful project.
You should. That is one of the things that came too late in my life. But I guess my daughter will inherit your children. But it goes. Shut your mouth.
I was about to ask something. I've seen the president go on the seawall. No, I need to tell the people this. The president is going to seawall, and everybody going and clean up this cleanup campaign. Freddie Kissoon is there every single day and does not clean up the seawall.
Excuse me. Let me tell you. I swear on the woman I love more than anything in this. I went couple years ago. Yeah, I think this is 23, early 22, and clear up that thing. Went with cutlass because my dog run all over the place. There's a homeless guy called Carl. That sleeps on the seawall. I give that man money to clean up things.
That was one time, right?
And guess when I give him money?
All right,
I give him money up to yesterday in the presence of my wife, Mr. Amran. The operator said the show is over. So you want to conclude?
Sure. Well, I mean, I didn't particularly have any concluding remark in mind, but only to say that the direction that the Guyanese economy is going is one that is very promising. But I want to leave the viewers and the listeners with a particular comment that not because the Guyanese economy is going in a particular direction means that you must just sit around and expect that it'll all come to you.
Wait for a handout.
Don't sit and wait for a handout. We are at a junction in this country that we cannot afford any single idle person. The labor market reflects that, and I urge all to meaningfully participate wherever they can, however they can, because it is certainly needed for the development of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Rambaran. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Right. You were watching the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. Just in case you just joined us for the first time as a viewer, this is the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. We come to you Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8:30 to 9:30, and depending on who's the guest, we will have a call-in program. We're having an important minister in another 2 weeks, so we will have a call-in as part of the session. On Fridays, Leonard Gildarie and I talk, give our reflections, and invite you to give your reflections. Our guest this evening was economist / businessman and senior vice president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce. We will be here on Wednesday, as usual. On behalf of my co-host, the evergreen The evergreen journalist. And on behalf of our articulate guest, Mr. Richard Rambaran, as I would normally say, thanks for being here. Catch you later, man.